The seedy tavern was filled with a choking stench of recycled air, stale sweat, and cheap intoxicants. Two men sat hunched together in a shadowy corner, faces half hidden by the flickering light of a malfunctioning holodisplay. One had a patch over his left eye and the ghost of a smile permanently etched on his scarred face. The other, younger and cautiously wide-eyed, absently scratched at the chip embedded in his forearm. That little piece of tech was their ticket to a payday bigger than either had ever dared to dream. "Look at them," muttered the one-eyed man, his voice low and gravelly. "Puppets on tangled strings, every one of them." "And us?" the younger man asked, glancing nervously around the room as if he expected someone to be watching. "What does that make us?" The one-eyed man chuckled, revealing a set of twisted and stained teeth. "We, my friend, are something more. Something the rest of them can't see." The younger man swallowed hard. "Are you certain it's here, Gavin?" "The Chrysalis." Gavin leaned even closer, and for a moment, the two men were almost nose to nose. "Oh, it's here all right. And we're going to find it before anyone else catches wind of its true potential." "But what if we're caught?" the younger man whispered, the words trembling on his lips. "Then we'll meet death together, won't we?" Gavin replied with a grin, clapping the boy firmly on the shoulder, pushing him to take the first step into their desperate hunt. The younger man nodded, his resolve hardening as he straightened his back and took a deep breath. They slipped out of the tavern, navigating through the dimly lit alleyways with practiced ease. Gavin led the way, his single eye scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. The Chrysalis was said to be hidden in an abandoned research facility on the outskirts of town. As they approached the building, their nerves were stretched taut like piano wire. The door was locked, but Gavin produced a small device from his pocket, and within seconds it beeped and clicked open. They stepped inside and were immediately met with darkness so thick that they could barely see their hands in front of their faces. Gavin pulled out a flashlight and shone it around the room until it fell upon a large metal case sitting on a table in the center of the room. "It's here," he breathed. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching from behind them. Gavin quickly extinguished the flashlight and pushed the younger man behind him. They both held their breath as the footsteps grew louder, closer. The sound of a weapon being cocked made their hearts race with fear. "Who's there?" Gavin called out, his voice steady despite the sweat trickling down his back. A moment of tense silence passed before a voice responded from the darkness. "You should not have come here," it said, low and menacing. Gavin reached for his own weapon, but before he could draw it, a bright light flooded the room as if someone had flipped on a switch. Blinking furiously to adjust their eyes to the sudden brightness, they saw three figures standing in front of them. Two armed guards flanking an older man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes. "You have trespassed on private property," the older man said coolly. "What is your business here?" Gavin took a step forward, trying to appear confident even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "We're just explorers looking for something valuable." The older man raised an eyebrow skeptically. "And what would that be?" "The Chrysalis," Gavin replied without hesitation. Gavin's eye glinted with the hint of a secret he wasn't ready to share. The room, now flooded with light, left no shadows to hide in. His mind raced as he took in the armed men, calculating his next move. "The Chrysalis," he repeated, emphasizing its significance. The older man smirked, his lips curling upward in a knowing smile. "You think you're the first to seek it?" he asked, stepping forward, his boots echoing ominously on the metal floor. The younger man, feeling exposed, instinctively took a step back, his hand twitching toward the chip embedded in his forearm. "I'm not interested in small talk," Gavin growled, his voice betraying no fear. "You have what we're looking for." Hand it over, and we'll leave peacefully." The guards tensed, their hands inching closer to their weapons. The older man chuckled softly, as though Gavin's demand was nothing more than a child's request. "Peaceful is not how this ends," he whispered, motioning to his men. The tension in the room snapped like a taut wire, and before anyone could react, the guards lunged forward. Gavin moved faster than the younger man had ever seen. His fist met the first guard's jaw with a sickening crack, sending him sprawling to the floor. The younger man, shaking off his hesitation, pulled out a small blade hidden in his sleeve, slashing at the second guard's arm. The man roared in pain, but before he could retaliate, Gavin had already pulled the trigger on his weapon, a flash of light sending the guard crashing into the wall. The older man didn't flinch, standing motionless as his guards fell. His cold blue eyes watched with detached interest. "Impressive," he mused, his tone almost bored. "But brute force won't get you the Chrysalis. You'll need more than fists and guns for what lies ahead." Gavin, panting slightly from the fight, wiped the blood from his lip and stepped forward. "Then guide us or get out of our way," he spat. The older man raised an eyebrow, his gaze locking onto Gavin's. "You don't even understand what you're after," he said, shaking his head. "The Chrysalis. It's not something you possess. It's something that possesses you." A chill ran down the younger man's spine. He glanced at Gavin, unsure if they should proceed. But Gavin's resolve never wavered. "I've faced worse," he growled. "Let's see what this thing is." "Follow me," the older man said with a sigh, turning toward a steel door at the far end of the room. The guards lay motionless on the floor, their groans of pain the only sound as Gavin and the younger man followed. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a long corridor lined with thick cables and dimly flickering lights. The air felt heavier here, oppressive, as though they were walking deeper into something alive. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the rhythmic hum of machinery vibrating beneath their feet. The younger man's nerves were on edge, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. What if this was a trap? What if the older man was leading them to their deaths? He glanced at Gavin, but the one-eyed man showed no signs of doubt. His single eye was fixed on the path ahead, unwavering. After what felt like hours, they reached another door. The older man pressed his palm against a scanner, and with a soft beep, the door slid open. Inside was a massive chamber, filled with glowing tubes and strange mechanical structures. In the center of the room, suspended in a glowing orb, was the Chrysalis. It pulsed softly, as if it were alive, and a strange alien energy filled the air. "There it is," the older man said, his voice barely a whisper. Gavin and the younger man stood frozen, their eyes locked on the glowing orb. The younger man could feel the hairs on his arms standing on end. This was no ordinary artifact. It radiated power, danger, and something else, something deeply unsettling. "What now?" the younger man asked, his voice barely audible. "Now," the older man said, turning to face them. "You make a choice." Gavin stepped forward, his hand reaching for the Chrysalis. But before he could touch it, the older man raised his hand. "Be warned," he said, his tone grave. "The Chrysalis doesn't give, takes. Once you claim it, there's no going back." Gavin hesitated for the first time, his hand hovering over the orb. "What does it do?" the younger man asked, his voice filled with dread. The older man smiled grimly. "It's not what it does," he replied, "but what it turns you into." Gavin's hand trembled slightly, but his resolve hardened once more. "I've come too far to back down now," he muttered, grabbing the Chrysalis with a swift motion. The room seemed to hum louder as the orb pulsed in his grip. First, nothing happened. Gavin stood still, the chrysalis glowing faintly in his hands. But then, a strange sensation washed over him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as though he were falling through an endless void. The younger man watched in horror as Gavin's body began to change. His skin seemed to shimmer, his muscles tensed, and his scarred face twisted in agony. "Gavin!" the younger man shouted, rushing forward to help. But before he could reach him, Gavin's body convulsed, and with a blinding flash of light, he was thrown backward, crashing into the wall. The chrysalis floated above him, glowing brighter than ever. Gavin's eye was wide open, but it was no longer human. It glowed with the same eerie light as the chrysalis, and his body lay motionless on the floor. "What happened to him?" the younger man whispered, his voice shaking. The older man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "He's become something else," he said softly. "The chrysalis has claimed him." The younger man stared at Gavin's lifeless body, his mind reeling. Was this what they had risked everything for? To become this thing? "We need to get out of here," the younger man said, backing away from the glowing orb. But the older man shook his head. "There's no leaving now. Not after you've seen this." The younger man felt a wave of panic rising in his chest. He had to escape, but every exit seemed blocked by the oppressive presence of the chrysalis. Suddenly, Gavin's body twitched. The younger man froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, Gavin began to rise, his movements unnatural, as though he were being controlled by an invisible force. His glowing eye locked onto the younger man, and for a moment, there was no recognition in his gaze. "Gavin?" the younger man asked, his voice trembling. Gavin's lips curled into a smile, but it was not his own. "I am no longer Gavin." The voice that came from him was deeper, more alien. "The chrysalis has awakened." The younger man's blood ran cold as the realization hit him. Gavin was gone. Whatever had taken control of him was something far more dangerous. "You were warned," the older man said calmly. "The chrysalis doesn't give. It takes." The younger man felt trapped, helpless. He had no idea how to fight whatever Gavin had become, and the older man showed no intention of stopping it. "What do you want?" the younger man asked, his voice shaking. "I want what I have always wanted," the older man replied. "To see the chrysalis unleashed, to witness its true power." He stepped forward, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light as Gavin's. "And now you will join us." The younger man backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the presence of the chrysalis. With no other options, the younger man made a desperate decision. He lunged forward, grabbing the chrysalis with both hands. The moment his fingers touched the orb, a surge of energy shot through him, and he felt his mind being pulled into a swirling void. His body convulsed as the chrysalis began to consume him, just as it had done to Gavin. As the younger man's consciousness drifted through the void, fragments of memories surfaced, images of a life before the hunt, before the chrysalis. He saw faces, names he couldn't quite place, and a world that felt distant, almost dreamlike. His thoughts were fragmented, scattered across the swirling energy of the chrysalis. But amidst the chaos, he felt a pull, a singular force that beckoned him deeper. The chrysalis was no mere object. It was a gateway, a conduit to something far greater. And now it had claimed him too. His body was gone, but his mind remained, floating in the vast expanse of the chrysalis realm. The older man watched with satisfaction as the younger man's body crumpled to the floor. "Another soul for the Chrysalis," he murmured, his eyes glowing with a dark, otherworldly power. He had seen this happen many times before, but it never ceased to fascinate him. The moment when a human soul was absorbed into the Chrysalis. But as he turned to leave, a sudden shift in the energy of the room made him stop. The Chrysalis pulsed violently, its glow flickering erratically. Something was wrong. The older man frowned, his heart racing. "What is this?" he muttered, stepping closer to the orb. The Chrysalis had never reacted this way before. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, but it was not Gavin's nor the younger man's. It was something far more ancient, far more powerful. "You cannot control me," the voice boomed, shaking the walls. The older man stumbled backward, fear gripping his heart for the first time in years. The Chrysalis had awakened, but not as he had expected. It was no longer content to consume souls. It wanted freedom. But tell me, did you like this story? Would you change anything? Would you like a sequel? Leave it in the comments, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and leave your like. And for more stories like this, click on the video that appears on the screen.